Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cornerstone Conversation Series. Today, we are most fortunate to have with us Secretary Zinke, former Secretary of the Interior, who is also running for Congress right now, as a history as a Navy SEAL, and has just been a real patriot for our country. And we're going to be talking about a host of different things today. But I'd like to just start with our experience as cabinet members in Washington, D.C. What did you sort of take away from that?
Well, I enjoyed the time in Interior. Certainly, it's an important mission. In Congress, when you hire your own staff, you go to D.C. and you more or less caucus with one party or another. When you go into Interior, it's almost from a SEAL perspective like being paradropped.
Mm.
Behind the desks there's a lot of great people, but there's a lot of agenda there, and they don't like change.
Right.
And I always have believed that it's better to charge up a hill under fire than cower in a foxhole. And we came in to make change, and it's time to make
Right.
a lot of big change. But the resistance movement is alive and well.
No question.
I was a big advocate for looking at reorganizing and pushing the authorities as much as we could out of D.C.
Mm-hmm.
and back, to the states or regions
Right.
where an issue isn't a piece of paper,
Right.
where an issue is a face.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the promise of America is when you have an issue and you need help. So,
Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually take some of the federal agencies and physically locate them somewhere else? Because all of those career employees tend to come from the D.C. area. And as a result of that, they tend to have DC mindsets. And wouldn't you rather have a situation where you have sort of a smattering of philosophies across the country rather than a concentrated one ideology type of situation?
well, yeah, and particularly in Interior, the issue, how do you manage Yellowstone River
Right.
if you don't know where it is? Or if Yellowstone is simply Kevin Costner,
Right.
series. So there's goodness in being out in the field, being where the decisions, should be made a lot of times. But there's a certain arrogance in D.C. that we know best. Our data set is best. But really, if you lose the connection to the land or forest fires or what's really happening to the people outside the
Yeah.
Beltway, and I think that's what we have. The trust when you go outside of D.C. and you ask your average citizen, do you trust the United States government? And if
Right.
so, what agency, what department do you trust? Typically, the answer is all silent.
Right.
Even Department of Defense, which was kind of the last of the Mohicans,
Right. They've fallen
yep,
recently.
after Afghanistan, the trust. And that, I think, is critical to bring transparency back in the government, have decisions where it's not a piece of paper,
Mm-hmm.
but decisions should be made on an issue because there's people behind it.
Right. Well, the biggest issue that I found when I first got there was there had been no CFO for 8 years, no effective office. Um, it wasn't possible to do an audit for several years because there were too many material defects. And the fiscal mess was unbelievable. And so fortunately, we were able to convince Irv Dennis, a 37-year veteran at Ernst & Young, to come after much, much arm twisting. And he and the team actually revamped everything. And now HUD has real audits. And we were able to get things to a point where we could actually get some of our programs done. That was good. Did we meet resistance? Absolutely. Because we came in with the philosophy of self-sufficiency. So many of the government programs are aimed at keeping people in poverty. They won't admit that, but that's what they do. They keep people in poverty so they can have them under their thumb. They're much easier to control. More importantly, their votes are much easier to control. You just make promises, I'm going to give you this, that, and the other. And you would think that would all be one party, but actually you see it on both sides. And that is something that really severely, I think, needs to be addressed because, America was the can-do society, the place where we wanted to give people equal opportunity, but not necessarily guarantee what the outcome would be. The outcome would be largely up to you, that each individual would be the person who has the most to do with what happens to them. And that was really the basis of the American dream. And I think that's something that we really are going to have to fight strongly because it is very tempting to give all power to the government and then expect the government to take care of you from cradle to grave. And you look at all the societies throughout world history who have tried that, and none of them have achieved the success and the stature of the United States of America. So I think the proof is in the pudding. We have something that works, but what we also have is a media that is intent on moving things in the other direction, more government-centric than people-centric. And that's problematic. The press having been the only business that's protected by our Constitution because they were supposed to disseminate to people the truth so that people would be able to make appropriate decisions, and the government was to run on the basis of the will of the people as opposed to being the dominant force that controlled the lives of the people. And it was, in fact, a great experiment because what society has ever really been truly people-centric. And that was the reason that after the Constitutional Convention in 1787, when Benjamin Franklin exited the building, a woman said, "Sir, what do we have here, a monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And that's a big issue.
If you can keep it. And I agree with you. The media has become biased, censorship. I mean, when you can censor President Donald J. Trump, whether people agree or disagree with the president, he has a voice. But we see is stories are censored, they're buried,
Right.
and the information is skewed.
Right.
Core and central to our government was really the fundamental idea of limited government, of self-determination, where the government shouldn't choose what you want to become.
Right.
That's on the basis of grit and, of course, protection of constitutional freedoms. Any society that is long and prosperous has to value work.
Right.
And when you reward idleness or you choose to have a government dependence over a long period of time, it has a deep-reaching negative effect on the nation. And a concern is institutional trust. It's transparency. It's also the idea of whether you're a dishwasher or a surgeon, all work is good. It's valued.
Everybody's essential.
Absolutely, and we should reward hard work. And true, it's also important that the opportunity is there. We look at the division in our country. A lot of people, and we're talking as much as 30%, don't think the opportunity is the same
Right.
for one class of citizen as it is for the next. And this is where we as a nation. And I am all about and deeply supportive of making sure people, the ladder of success, making sure people find that first rung.
Yes, absolutely.
Bring them the first rung, help them climb that first rung. The other rungs, give them the ability to climb, But there seems to be a gap when they don't think the opportunity is the
Right.
same, and that needs to be that
Yeah.
also needs to be worked
Well,
on.
that's why I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago on compassionate action, not affirmative action, but compassionate action, which basically says uh, we should give an extra hand up to whoever needs it, but that should not be based on race. That should be based on circumstances. And the people who need an extra hand up will change over the course of time. Uh, but you don't have to change the program if you do it on the basis of need and not on the basis of race. And, just as an example, my three sons, uh, they grew up with every advantage, financial and otherwise. That was never an issue. Um, and let's say my oldest son applies to Yale, and he's done well, good grades, good scores, everything intact. And then let's say there's a white kid from Appalachia uh, who has done well, not quite as well. Maybe instead of having a 4.0 average, he has a 3.9 average. Instead of having 1,600 SATs, he's got 1,500
A
SATs.
real slacker.
A real slacker. But he's been working since he was 12 years old in the coal mine after his father died. Now, which of those kids should get a little extra attention? It really should be based on the circumstances and not based on the color of one's skin. And, that brings me to the issue that has really been quite inflammatory, and that's critical race theory, which is basically antithetical to what Dr. Martin Luther King advocated. He dreamed of a time when people would be judged on the character of the quality of their character and not the color of their skin. Critical race theory turns that completely around 180 degrees and says you should look at the color of a person's skin and determine whether they're an oppressor or an oppressed person. And your reactions toward them should be oriented toward which of those two categories they fall into. And that is just so asinine, to be honest with you. When you think about it, animals versus people, you look at their brains. On the surface, the topography is quite similar. Let's say a dog and a man. But the dog's midbrain is much better developed. Now, why is that? Because the midbrain allows you to react. Dogs react much faster than people. Most animals react much faster than people. But people have these gigantic, well-developed frontal lobes where you engage in rational thought processing, where you extract information from the past and the present, integrate it into a plan, and control the future. You can assess things. You can evaluate things. So what critical race theory says is don't act like a human being, act like a dog. Just react to stuff. React to superficial things. Don't use that incredible capacity that God gave us when he made us in his image. And, that, amongst other things, are the reasons that, I've come out pretty forcefully against it. And I'm glad to see that a lot of people have crossed political barriers to recognize that that is basically very destructive to our society. Because if you can convince the majority of people that we have a broken system, that our country is systemically racist, then you've laid the foundation for fundamentally changing the country. And I just don't think that that is legitimate at all. If we were so bad, why would people be forming caravans trying to get in here? And once they got here, they found out how bad it was. They'd be trying to get out. That's not happening.
No. No. And the character of the country is, I think, based on the premise that success should be determined by hard work, innovation, but not by your color of your skin.
Right.
And you look at the education system that we have. Most free. Recently it was the Loudoun County School Board, and I would think the elections in Virginia had far more to do with Loudoun County School Board and their actions, and what it meant to parents. And all of a sudden, parents are sending their kids to school, and parents don't have a say. Well, of course they do. Of course they do, and they should have a say. And school boards need to be held accountable. But like our school boards across the nation, our country's in trouble. And a lot of it is because we kind of let someone else do it. Well, someone else can run for the school board. Someone else can do the hard lifting. But I'm going to be happy in my own world. But democracy is a very fragile institution, and it takes active participation.
Absolutely.
And when you let it go, I think the nation now looks up and goes, "Wait a minute." The woke movement, in a lot of ways, is a wake-up movement.
And that's what Reagan meant when he said, our freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.
Absolutely.
All it takes is for us to sort of stick our head in the ground like an ostrich and not step up to the plate and do something when we see things being threatened, when we see freedom of speech being threatened. Some people say, our freedom of speech is okay. The government's not restricting our speech. But if big tech and social media are restricting your speech, and if you're penalized and canceled for your speech, and you have the compliance of the government, isn't that exactly the same thing as the government doing it? And it has exactly the same effect. So our liberties are being threatened. And it's up to we, the people, to do something about that. And that's the actual reason that our founders worked so hard to give us the Constitution that they gave us, because they knew from their study of governments throughout the world and their study of history that the natural tendency of government, no matter how you start out, is to grow, to infiltrate, and to control. And they gave us a Constitution, we the people, in order to control the expansion and growth of the government. And of course, the threat that we see right now that's facing us is with COVID. It provides an excellent opportunity for government to control your life and to open that door to totalitarian control. And we need to recognize that. That's not to say that COVID isn't a serious issue, but it's not nearly as serious as some people try to make it out to be. And for instance, you look at children. The chance of a child dying from COVID is no greater than the chance of them dying from seasonal flu. And yet, look at us trying to mandate that they get vaccines, the long-term effects of which we do not know. This is a new type of technology. So basically what we're doing is forcing people to take part in a medical experiment. We don't know what's going to happen 15 years down the road. We don't know if people will develop all kinds of autoimmune phenomena. We don't know. So in a situation where your chances of having a bad outcome from catching the virus are well known, we know what those risks are. They're close to zero. Why would you then subject somebody to a risk that you don't know that will last for many years? Doesn't matter for older people who have comorbidities. I don't want to sound crass, but they're not going to be around, 15 or 20 years from now. So we really need to start thinking about our young people and start recognizing that we have an excellent medical system in this country. Just as good, if not better, than any in the world. So people armed with the appropriate information, working with their healthcare professionals, who, by the way, should not be intimidated, which they are now. Some of them get canceled if they say certain things or do certain things. Let them work with these trained professionals rather than having a bunch of bureaucrats sitting behind a desk determining what the future of your child should be and what their health should be.
Well, there's also the unintended consequences. When a child, in the case of COVID, misses an entire year of school or goes to remote learning in class, not all students learn the same.
Exactly.
And what we're seeing is students are well behind in their studies. Does that mean they're going to extend 1 year or 2 years? There's a kind of a rabbit going to the snake of consequence because they're behind.
Right.
Are they going to ever catch up? Well, when are they going to catch up? And are they going to be prepared for the next phase of their life? And then the social consequence of either not having sports or distances. Part of school is socialization skills, of interaction between kids and adults, and to a degree that in many cases has been segregated. Mm-hmm. And there is an effect. You look at depression, you look at a number of things that are happening to our kids. Mm-hmm. This is issue, and I think you correctly point out that in many ways we're going through uncharted territory, but it seems to be being accelerated by a political agenda. Right. And much of it seems to be unconstitutional. At least the Fifth and Eighth Circuit would say that.
There's been 3 or 4 different federal courts that have come and ruled against it now. And that's important. And also, our government's complete neglect of the impact of natural immunity. They don't even want to talk about it. We've known about the effect of natural immunity since the Civil War and the smallpox outbreak. And we know how powerful it is, and yet they don't even want to consider it. Even though tens of millions, maybe up to 100 million people in our country have natural immunity. And, I was looking at television this morning, a nurse and a therapist in New York who had lost their jobs because they refused to be immunized. They were right on the front lines when this thing first came out, and they had COVID, and they had natural immunity, but that wasn't good enough, and they got fired.
Well, I see in the news this morning, some are advocating now a third shot based on the new variant that really hasn't been around that much.
Right.
So you look at, well, how did they come up with now a third shot is more effective for a variant that's been hasn't been around that long, as you point out.
They keep changing it, and that's what viruses do. They change. There are no viruses that don't do that. So every time it does it, it's a 5-alarm fire.
Well, I can tell you what a 5-alarm fire should be too. Is there's other areas where there's a breach when I think of the Constitution, and one of it is IRS. Mm-hmm. When they're talking about 80,000 IRS agents, and then it's $10,000 cumulative, so it's not per transaction, but it's cumulative. Right. And most people have throughout the year $10,000 in and out on an account. Right. But to me, that strikes against illegal search of personal papers. Mm-hmm. I can't think of anything more personal than your bank account, because Absolutely. That's a roadmap of where you're spending money, why, priorities, but without a warrant or probable cause. Right. And 80,000 IRS agents, it seems to me they're probably not there to help you. No. They're probably there to harass you on what I think is a personal paper. So I'm hoping that's challenged as well.
And to try to collect the money to pay for these incredible programs that you're trying to put out there. It's kind of sad, because if you raise the national debt to a certain level, then you can justify massive taxation, redistribution of wealth, and complete control. And you have to wonder, do these people know what they're doing? Have they planned this out? Are there some few who know what they're doing and the others are useful idiots, like Lenin said? I don't know, but I do know that it's not fair to the next generation if you have this level of debt, because the service on the debt is going to cost them half their paycheck. And if you're paying half your paycheck for taxes, you're really putting a dagger in the heart of the American dream.
Well, and we talked about the arrogance of Washington D.C. That they know best because their data is better. And I think it strikes at the D.C. mindset. And look, 4 or 5 or maybe 6 now of the richest counties in America around D.C. And what does D.C. produce? Well, D.C. produces bureaucracy at an accelerating rate. But someone has to pay for that bureaucracy.
Right.
Bureaucracy, I'm very pro-defense. I was a SEAL commander, and a national defense and an ability to fight and win is critical to our nation's survival. But over a course of time, we have 800,000 DOD employees. And that's outside the Army. That's as big as the United States Army.
Right.
And just the bureaucracy that has grown, the F-35, great aircraft, but it took 17 years to develop.
Right.
There isn't a cell phone in the city that's 17 years old, and that's the backbone of the technology. Now we're flying. And there's other examples. Is the bureaucracy we've created really doesn't allow, in this age, this information age, innovation, technology, rapid to the market, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
But it seems like the government sometimes is on dial-up, and the rest of the world's on digital.
Well, I have to take a moment just to thank you for your incredible service to our country, your military service, service as a SEAL, service as a cabinet member, your upcoming service as a congressman. It would be so easy just to say, I'm just going to go and enjoy life. Me and my wife, we're just going to have fun. But you're not doing that. Why?
That was certainly a temptation, but I think where we are in our country is we're in trouble. And it's time to rally. I have a background and experience that I think will be helpful in turning this ship around. But it's not going to be easy. We didn't get here overnight.
Right.
But some things are worth fighting for, and our freedom, our country is just one of them.
Absolutely.
And so it's worth the personal inconvenience for the benefit of everyone. And I've been on teams all my life, with a football team or a SEAL team or in Congress. But I wouldn't run if I didn't know absolutely this is fixable.
Yeah.
What man breaks, man can fix. It's going to take strength. It's going to take resolve. It's going to take leadership. But this is not outside of a reach of a great country and great people.
And the world needs us. They need us to lead. You see all the crazy things that are going on in other countries surrounding COVID. That's because we're not leading. We're not doing logical things. And you see what's happening with Russia, with China, with Iran. I mean, it's just, if you don't have strong leadership in the world, chaos ensues. People should study their history and see what the world was like before the United States became the great power. We had all these despotic leaders running around, crushing anybody who was weaker than them and pillaging and taking. And that's died down to a large extent now. But if we go off the scene, I guarantee you it comes back. And we have a responsibility not only to our people, but to the world.
We do, and I think the biggest threat facing our country is not Russia, China, or even Iran. It's the division within this country.
No question.
And a recent poll had about 40% of the population saying the biggest threat to the country is the opposite party. Mm-hmm. And then the other 40% said, well, it's the other side.
Right.
So you have an overwhelming majority that believes, at least by this poll, that the greatest threat facing the country is an opposite political party of another American,
Right.
rather than the traditional, either enemies or adversaries or economic competitors. It now is your fellow Americans. And that will send us to Davy Jones' locker.
No question about it.
We've got to work as Americans. And look, we have problems. We have a border problem. So how do we solve a border problem? Well, first we got to stop the leaks.
Right.
So let's secure the border. Let's find out who's in this country. Everyone should be vetted. So a vetting process is not on the basis of religion or culture.
Right.
It's on the basis of character.
Yeah.
We want good people to come in and immigrate. We just want to know who they are and welcome.
Right.
But it has to be
Controlled.
controlled and methodical and reasonable and make sure that we don't have drugs coming across the border and
human trafficking.
and human trafficking and really the border has become a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
Where young women are getting accosted or raped, and it's because we don't have control of our southern border. This is fixable.
It is.
It's absolutely fixable. Our inflation is fixable. At the heart of it is energy.
Right.
When we were in, we went from 8.3 million barrels a day to 12.5 million barrels a day. And look, I'm not oil and gas centric. I'm just American energy centric.
Well, just logic. Because if, in fact, we had become energy independent, we were a net exporter of energy, and at the same time had the cleanest air and water on record. Being independent gives us a lot of flexibility on the international scene.
Yeah, and I spent most of my adult life in the SEALs, and a lot of it was spent fighting overseas for someone else's oil.
Right.
And I can tell you, I don't want your children, your grandchildren, to ever see what I've seen. And so to wean ourselves away from foreign influence, from being beholden by other nations for our energy needs, and environmentally, it is not in dispute. It's better to produce energy in this country under our regulatory framework than watch it get produced overseas with no regulation.
Exactly.
And if you don't want to believe me, I'd love to take people on a tour of the Middle East or Africa and show them exactly how not to produce energy.
And you can also work simultaneously on green renewable energy.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that says it has to be one or the other. You can do both.
And you have to make sure it's affordable. Because
Exactly.
when energy isn't affordable, which is approaching that case, so what will happen this winter is the government will subsidize energy. That means taxpayer dollars, rather than going for other things, will go to subsidize energy because the cost of energy has risen.
Right.
And then in countries like Africa and developing nations, if the cost of oil or gas is expensive, they'll go to alternate energy sources that are cheaper and unfortunately
dirtier.
far more dirtier. And energy itself is really the key to the economy. And you look at jobs and what affordable energy produces is, you look at a manufacturing of any product. Commodity prices are about the same, whether you're talking steel in South Korea or Pittsburgh. You have labor costs. Labor costs are going to be higher in the U.S., as they should, because we have to pay our people. Where America has an advantage is innovation and energy costs, because we were blessed with an enormous amount of energy, but we can't manufacture when energy costs are artificially elevated by either subsidy or you're using a more expensive energy and you're just saying, well, our energy costs are going to be higher. It has catastrophic effects on jobs, on the economy, and unfortunately has catastrophic effects on the environment.
Well, I am so delighted that you're running for Congress and that you're going to be a voice of reason and that we're going to see courage, because isn't that what we need in our country? We can't be the land of the free if we're not the home of the brave. So I just want to thank you for always exhibiting that bravery, that courage, and providing the example, the role model that we need to make America great. Thank you.
Well, and to tell you, when we were secretaries together, I commend you because you've been an example for so many others. And just to sit next to you, I thought, I feel very, sometimes very, it was so great to sit next to you because you were a man of intense thought, of what I call your operational patience. You really don't get upset a lot, but you think about it very hard, and you come to great conclusions. And I think you've been an inspiration for others, and thank you.
Well, thank you. We'll look forward to continuing these conversation series with you when you come here as a congressman.
Well, and follow me at ryanzinke.com, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Terrific. Thank you.